whether I have a $10 million business or a $100 million business, I'm going to worry the same. The guy worrying about making his house payment that's making $15 an hour, his worry is no more or no less than my worry about making payroll. So once you understand those two concepts, that he didn't work any harder, he just had more zeros, and I'm going to worry no matter what the size of my company is, then you have to ask yourself, well, why wouldn't I do this? I mean, it's almost slothful, if you don't do it. There's some things in the scripture about that too. So, to whom much has been given, much is expected. So that's really those things kind of came together, and that's why we chose to go for it.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? How important is transparency to you and the culture of the business? Have you thought about it? Have you thought about how open you are with, strategies of moving forward? Maybe it's mergers and acquisitions. There's probably a place where you draw the line on transparency. We all have it. You will find that fast growth companies lean toward a much more remarkable transparency. It's one of the core factors of having people feel like owners and having them operate and behave that way. When you have transparency, you don't have to sort through the good and the bad. We're going to talk about that in today's interview. We have Matthew Nix. He's the CEO and president of Nix Companies. They were 2,220 on the 2019 list. They've grown astronomically fast because of the power of transparency and how it develops leaders, develops the people inside the organization. One thing I like about this conversation is I asked him, where do you draw the line? Do you share the good and the bad, or just the good? And his response might surprise you. So tune in to today's episode about the power of transparency and what that means for your leadership development. Now, if you haven't had a chance to connect with the 12 principles of fast growth companies, make sure you sign up right now. Absolutely free. After all of these interviews, I've had the chance to codify some of the core principles of fast growth. Just go to genehammett.com/principles, and you can download your free copy of the 12 principles. We've got it down to 3 pieces of paper, and we give you some examples of companies that are doing this well. So if you want to go check that out, just go to genehammett.com/principles. Now here's the interview with Matthew. Hey, Matthew, how are you?
Hey, good, Gene. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you on the podcast. I have already introduced you personally to our audience, but I'd love for you to tell us about Nix Company.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nix Companies, we call ourselves a diversified metal solutions provider, and really because we couldn't come up with anything better to call it. So we started as a blacksmith. My great-great-grandfather started it and evolved into a little mom and pop welding fabrication business. And what's interesting about our business is, although it's multi-generational, it was mom and pop when my brother and I joined, and we've grown the business. We're approaching 100 times growth, which is a goal of ours. We went from 4 family members to almost 100 employees, and approaching 25 million in annual revenue. So we've got that dynamic of a long-time legacy business and a fast growth startup business. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic there. We do industrial and commercial metal fabrication and industrial maintenance primarily.
Well, I appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about growth a little bit. We're going to mostly talk about leadership, because when we did the research on your company, we really looked at what was driving that growth, and you thought strong, capable leaders was very important. So why is it so important?
Well, I can't think of anything that's more important than a strong leadership team. We've been really fortunate and blessed to have had the opportunity to do some acquisitions in the last few years, and so I've become a student of businesses in our industry, and it's a very fragmented blue collar industry, and there's a thing that I've kind of have a term internally. We call it maximum complexity, and what I've noticed is there's a revenue threshold that so many of these businesses get to. If I'm looking at businesses out there, there's this band of revenue that's like, why do they all do about the same amount of revenue? What I uncovered was it's that what I call maximum complexity. So you've got the founder or the president, and he's the chief cook and bottle washer. And the business, whatever industry you're in, each business has a threshold that it'll allow itself to grow to before you become the roadblock to scale in that business further. And that number changes depending on the industry you're in. But so if you're going to break beyond that, you're only going to do it by multiplying, yourself and your leaders in the organization. And so there's nothing more important than that.
I love that, because I've seen that in my clients' work and people I even interview. They have to go through these kind of reinventions. And you were describing to me that this was kind of a family-owned business and you wanted to take it to another level with you and your brother. Why was it so important to grow the company?
Well, early on, I'll be honest, we probably, we were sort of growing for growth's sake. You're young, you're trying to prove to yourself and prove to others, that you can do it. There's, some ego involved and things of that nature. But as you grow and mature, our reasons, I think, have become more founded. And really, I think, there's an old saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. It's kind of overused, but to some degree, it's true. And a mentor of mine told me once, he said, if you have a tiger, you don't grab its tail, you feed it meat. And, we're open to growing. And I was wrestling with that idea. I think a lot of us entrepreneurs and business leaders wrestle with that idea about growth. And something I really wanted to share with all these other business leaders out there. If you're thinking about whether or not to grow your business, or if you're wrestling with that question, I got a short story. I had this kind of aha moment that happened all in a course of, I really think it was kind of divine intervention came together. I spent a lot of time discerning and praying it, and all in the course of a short amount of time, these things happen. So first, I was talking to a mentor of mine who was the COO of a very big tech company, and they ended up selling it for like $4 billion or something. And we were talking one evening, and he said, kind of half jokingly, he said, "Matthew, I don't work any harder than you do. My work just has more zeros behind it." So that was number one that I was like, that's interesting. And then very shortly after that, I was reading a book. It was what was I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget here. Oh, it was Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. And in that book, that it's about surviving concentration camps in the Holocaust. And the author talks about worry. And he says, worry is like oxygen. It fills every cubic inch of any space that it's in. So kind of, what I took away from that was, whether I have a $10 million business or a $100 million business, I'm going to worry the same. The guy worrying about making his house payment that's making $15 an hour, his worry is no more or no less than my worry about making payroll. So once you understand those two concepts, that he didn't work any harder, he just had more zeros, and I'm going to worry no matter what the size of my company is, then you have to ask yourself, well, why wouldn't I do this? I mean, it's almost slothful, if you don't do it. There's some things in the scripture about that too. So, you to whom much has been given, much is expected. So that's really those things kind of came together, and that's why we chose to go for it.
Well, Matthew, you have been putting together and building and optimizing your leadership team, and that's such an important piece. Do you remember kind of the signs when you were kind of in the number of employees you had, when you're like, we really need a stronger leadership team?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know the exact number, and again, it varies depending on the business you're in. But I definitely remember the moment you get to that point where you can't be everything to everybody, and you realize to go to the next level, we've got to put this team in place. I probably did it proactively a little bit sooner than most would. It was sort of the if you build it, they will come model. That made some people around me pretty nervous. We were bringing on salaries for leadership people that maybe when we couldn't justify them, but we have some good luck and things fell into place. But if we hadn't had those pieces of the puzzle in place, we would not have been able to capitalize and to really grow like we did. So yeah, I mean, it was somewhere, we're about 100 folks now. I mean, somewhere in that 30 to 40 range is when I had to have that next level layer of, leadership.
Hold on for a second. Matthew just talked about the need to be proactive and be proactive with his executive leadership team. A lot of people are showing up reactive as a default. Think about it for a second. In your schedule, do you see reactive or do you see proactive? Do you feel overwhelmed or do you feel like you're moving forward intentionally and have your strategies built around the company growing and the way that you see it growing? Or are you just reacting to the day, reacting to the moment, reacting to the client? Fast growth companies really embrace this sense of being proactive in all senses. And they're at that level at about 80% of the time. You may not truly get to 100% of proactiveness because things happen, but most of my clients say that they would be closer to 80% reactive and 20% proactive before working with me, and it's a complete shift after that fact. Just keep that in mind. Back to the interview. Do you remember back then what were some of the challenges you saw and maybe even worried about, but they really didn't become something you needed to worry about?
I don't know. I don't recall anything like that. I do recall a situation that really changed the landscape of what it looks like today, and a challenge we were working through. Before we had the leadership team that we have, my brother and I were, I was working in the shop all day and then coming into the office in the evening, and I was really down and out, and we were having a lot of turnover. And my brother said, what's wrong with you? And I said, this or that. We were dealing with a situation, and I said, I guess we're just going to have to tolerate a certain amount of bullshit, or we're just never going to have any employees. And he said, absolutely not. We're not lowering our standards. It kind of gave me a kick in the ass that I needed to, I was kind of sulking. And so we made a decision right then and there that we were not going to make concessions, that we were going to have good people. We were going to do things the right way. And it was very painful. I mean, we probably had 5 or 10 employees at that point in time. But I always remember that as a watershed moment. If we hadn't made that decision right then and there, we would have went down a path just like every other business. We would have been mediocre, and mediocrity breeds more mediocrity. And the leadership team we have today wouldn't be here had we not made that decision.
Hold on for a minute here. Did you hear that tolerating? What does that mean to you? Are you tolerating your work, the work culture? A mentor once said to me, you don't get what you want. You get what you tolerate. What that means here is that you have to identify the things that you're tolerating. You have to really look at this with a critical eye, because it really is necessary for you to grow and create the kind of intention around the organization that's necessary. I find most of the time leaders are tolerating way too much, and that's the reason why they live in a place of frustration and they deal with so much uncertainty. What are you tolerating? Back to the interview. I love that story because it's so true on you get what you tolerate. And yes. Your brother said, we're not going to tolerate this. And that's one reason why you are where you are, Matthew. Yes. I want to dive into this whole concept. What steps have you taken to ensure that your executive leadership team kind of grows together and is optimized?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some things. There's some things that we've done. I think Jim. I'll think of it in a minute. Jim Collins. He's got a book about. It's a really short, little thin read, but it's like turning goals into reality. And he talks about these catalytic mechanisms. And I was thinking on that before the call. Bless you.
Thank you.
And so catalytic mechanisms. So it's things that really transform goals into concrete, realizable things. And I think looking back, we did some of those things like, just intuitively, I guess. But the biggest thing was right out of the gate, our leadership team had to have ownership, both figuratively and now literally. So you think about a 5th generation family business and then giving ownership, literal shareholdership to executive level leadership. That was a big decision to do. So, but before we did that, we had to bring people in that would really take ownership in the company and believe in the vision, of course have to cast that vision to them. But like what I mean by that is almost everybody on our senior leadership team took a pay cut to be here. Nobody got a pay raise. I can guarantee you that. They left bigger benefits with Fortune 500 companies or very well-established companies, took pay cuts to come here because they believed in what we were doing and wanted to be a part of this. And that was first and foremost. You can't give someone literal ownership in a company and think that they're magically going to treat it, better. But if they already treat it like their own, and then you give them ownership, look out, because you've just really poured fuel on the fire. So we did that. Another thing we did was, it was really important if we were going to scale the business and have a senior leadership team, is that we, as a family, treat the business like a business separate. It's its own living, breathing thing. And we had to do that. And I consulted some mentors that I highly respect, multi-generation family businesses, about giving ownership, or not giving, offering ownership to senior leadership. And I heard a lot of great arguments about why that wasn't maybe the best for the family or the CEO or what have you. But not one person gave me an argument for why it wasn't best for the business. If you truly treat the business like a living, breathing thing of its own, I couldn't get one argument from these highly respected people for why that didn't make sense. So we've tried to, the business is its own thing, and there's so many components. We could do a whole hour podcast on, what comes out of that. But and then bringing that senior leadership team into real ownership, which they're buying, they're putting their hard-earned money into, and it just really pours fuel to the fire.
I know you don't know much about the work I do, but the next book I'm writing is all about this feeling of ownership, even when employees don't have a financial stake. Like, it's possible to actually have people committed to the growth of the organization, even if they don't have options and stock and that what.
Well, the opposite is true also. That's a great point. It's also you can have real stock in a company, real equity, and not feel ownership of it. That's even more catastrophic. I mean, you just gave up equity to your company and the people don't have ownership. I've seen these companies that'll have partners, and then it's a secret of who the partners are. That's the craziest damn thing I ever heard of. There's two parts to owning anything. There's a financial reward of owning it, or a financial downside of owning it. And then there's the pride. I mean, I always tell people there's hardly no financial justification for owning a vacation home with Airbnb today. I mean, it's hard to justify the math to own it. Why do people own it? Well, they own it because they take pride in saying, I own 2 houses or whatever. I mean, business is the same thing. So yeah, you're exactly right. Ownership in your heart and ownership on paper are not necessarily always go together.
When you think about, keeping the team aligned and the things that you do consistently, the rituals of the organization, what come up to you, Matthew?
The rituals of our organization?
Yep. Around leadership.
Well, transparency. I mean, if you want to call that a ritual, I guess it's more of a way of life. But it becomes a ritual, when you have your monthly meetings or your review meetings. Transparency and what we talk about, ownership. People say accountability. I like ownership better. We're talking about it in a figurative sense. I mean, so transparency and taking ownership. Our CFO knows I love to use the phrase all the time. We've got, if we want people to win, we have to tell them the score. So we always refer to our CFO as the scorekeeper. So, we're really big on that. We share, each division manager knows their financial position in the business and where they're at week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter. We come together, we take ownership in the results, good, bad, or indifferent, and all try to keep, pulling together to make this thing go. So this transparency and that ownership, accountability, I guess, has been really big.
I just had a conversation with someone about transparency. So I'll kind of see how you would answer the question. There is some negative news inside the business. There's some things that really maybe you're afraid to let the team know because it's not good for the business. Do you hold those things back, or are you fairly transparent about those moments?
Well, I think you've got to, if you're going to be transparent, you got to do it both ways, good and bad. It can be equally uncomfortable going both directions. So, yeah, I mean, hey, we're going through some tough times like everybody right now with this pandemic, and we've had a couple unbelievable years leading up to this where everybody was getting huge bonuses, and we were buying new equipment and new trucks, and it was great. And I had to have a discussion with everybody here a few months ago and say, look, we've got to really tighten up, and we're fine. We're financially healthy, but even with that, here are some things we're going to have to do, some concessions we're going to have to make. Reducing bonuses is one of those. We can't buy all those new toys we wanted this year, and here's why. But here's where we're going to get to, and when we get to this point, then we'll turn it back on and we'll go again. And you can't be afraid. I think your people will just respect you so much more if you just be honest with them in the good and the bad. And then the last thing I'll say on that is when people, it's so disrespectful to act like people don't know what's going on. I mean, if the owner pulls in a new vehicle and you try to tell them that, things are terrible, I mean, how disrespectful. And then on the flip side, when things are tough, they know things are tough, and you try to pretend like it's all great. And then their mind goes to, 10 times worse than it really is. So you've got to be honest about good or bad.
I'm with you on that one, Matthew. Transparency is a hard one, but fast growth companies like yourself and those that really do believe in people feeling like owners embrace transparency to the point of it's a little bit remarkable how transparent they are. I know that we could go in many different directions. I want to kind of wrap this up today with, the defining moments of leadership are hard. You've been through many moments. Does something come to mind about a moment where you had to grow as a leader and let go of some of the old beliefs behind?
Yeah, I'm still working. I'm working harder at that than ever, and failing at it more than ever, I think. Yeah, I do think we're going through another one of those moments. Now the growth has flattened off this year. We're getting ready. We're in a rebuilding year. We're getting ready to go again when the economy comes back, and we're setting the pieces in place right now. But yeah, you lead different when you're at 30 people and when you're at 100, and then we're getting ready to go to try to go to 200 or so. So you lead different, and we've got 5 locations, and we're looking at another one in the near future. So you change that all the time. I think the couple big things I've realized lately is that I can't be the one solving all the problems. And so I've got to really work on, promoting my team to solve those problems and just be there to lean on, instead of being the go-to. And then the other big one I've learned is that an idea that I come up with is not nearly as good as an idea that's maybe 70 or 80% of what I think it should be that somebody else comes up with. They're gonna because they are now the ones that have to go make it happen. Those senior leaders beneath me, they're the ones that have got to go carry it out, execute, make it all happen. And if they don't buy into it and believe in it, it's not going to go anywhere. And as much as I want to push to make things go, we've got that complexity now where they have to do that. So I've learned to, let them develop. Say, hey guys, here's where I think the challenge is, and here's kind of where I think we should go. You figure out how to get there, and then let's run with that. And I'll give you the resources to do that. So those are a couple things believe me, I'm not getting it right all the time, but I'm working on that right now.
Well, all of the things you just talked about, Matthew, are in alignment with what does it take to make people feel like owners. You've got to welcome their ideas, not just yours. You've got to include them in these decisions that allow them to move forward. You've got to empower them in a way that allows them to not only provide their ideas, but also make the decisions of how we move forward, and maybe even being okay with failure. So there's a lot of things you wrapped into that are really critical to having a culture where people feel like owners, even when they don't have that financial stake. Yep. So Matthew, thanks for being here, sharing your journey of leadership, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
I love interviews like this where we talk about the sense of ownership, and it really becomes a core theme for that interview. Sometimes you don't know if you'll get to it, but I believe in this so much that you want people to feel that sense of ownership. Do they feel it in your company? Do you feel it across the people that you look at? Can you see it in their eye? I once had an interview with someone that says, I can look someone in the eye within a few seconds. I can tell you if they've got that spark of ownership. And it's a great feeling when I know that because I've seen it so many times. And I can identify it when someone's not showing up with that spark in their eye. It's a pretty cool way to look at it. My job is to help leaders continue to evolve and create the kind of place within leadership where they actually are evolving. I work with those leaders in the defining moments of their own leadership. Everyone has it. We all have to level up at some point. My job is to help you do that. If you feel like you want to reach out to me, make sure you send me an email, gene@genehammett.com. If you are in the midst of some kind of little company is going, if you can have the ability to slow down yourself, it'd be great to have a conversation with someone else. And I'd love to have that conversation with you. All right. That's our piece today. The power of transparency as it relates to growing your company and developing the leaders inside your company. Hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Share it with a friend. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.